The text arrived while I was in the middle of helping customers at my boutique. I glanced down at my phone and read the words, calm as a winter morning. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. Haha. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I was still helping Mrs. Peterson pick out a scarf, offering advice on colors and textures as if nothing had happened. The only sign that my husband of 12 years had just obliterated our marriage with a single text was the tiniest tightening around my eyes, a flicker of irritation or disbelief. It was hard to tell which. I waited until Mrs. Peterson had left, her purchase wrapped neatly in our signature silver paper, before I finally typed my reply. Just 3 simple words. Good luck. My name is Claire, and at 38 years old, I had just received what might be the coldest, most thoughtless goodbye in history. But while Mark was probably sitting somewhere in Miami, or maybe still in our city, planning the logistics of his grand exit, imagining me curled up in tears, devastated by his betrayal, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. My life didn't stop because of him. My hands didn't tremble. My mind didn't spiral. The signs had been there for months if I'd cared to notice. The late nights at work that never matched the deposits in our bank. The sudden, secretive changes to his phone passwords. The obsessive trips to the gym, the new clothes, the desperate attempts to reclaim his lost youth. 3 months ago, I had found a receipt for dinner for 2 at a pricey restaurant on a night he'd claimed he was working late. That was the moment I realized he was living a double life, and I began preparing for the inevitable. That very night, I opened a separate bank account at a different bank. A week later, when he casually suggested we combine our accounts to simplify things, I had agreed cheerfully, all the while moving my personal savings into the new account. The joint account he had just emptied. It had contained exactly enough money to keep him from suspecting anything, maybe 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safe, tucked away, along with meticulously detailed records of every suspicious transaction he had made over the past year. Every dinner, every overpriced gift, every tiny lie. It was all documented. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text from him. Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the new receptionist at his office. I had met her once at the company Christmas party. Had watched her laugh too loudly at Mark's jokes, noticed the way she lightly touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to think she was special, clever enough to believe she was irreplaceable. But here's the thing about me. I had already seen this coming. I had planned for it. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't shocked. I was ready. And while he imagined me helpless and heartbroken, I was already 3 steps ahead. Calm, composed, and quietly enjoying the knowledge that the game had just begun, and I was going to win. I didn't respond to his text. Not even a single word. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, the same one I had consulted 2 months ago when I first noticed those suspicious hotel charges on our credit card statement. I didn't need to explain much. It's time, I said simply. He just made his move, my lawyer replied calmly. The papers are ready. I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want me to have him served in Miami? No rush, I said, leaning back in my chair, letting the words settle in the quiet of my office. Let him think he's won first. Almost immediately, another text arrived from Mark. I read it slowly, savoring each condescending word. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop. The very shop I had built from scratch. The boutique that had started as a dream and had grown into a thriving business. The boutique that brought in more money than his middle management salary, and whose profits I had carefully kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, picturing the certified letters that would soon arrive in Miami. Letters that would remind him that his triumph was nothing more than a temporary illusion. That evening, I stayed in the house I had inherited from my grandmother. My house. I had refused every one of Mark's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. That instinct, that quiet stubbornness, had already paid off in ways he could never have imagined. While organizing the paperwork my lawyer would need for tomorrow, my fingers brushed against our old wedding album. I flipped through it and couldn't help noticing how different Mark looked then, before his midlife crisis had transformed him into a caricature of the man I had married. Back then he had been confident, composed, and present. These days, he wore shirts far too tight for his softening middle, tried desperately to bond with 20-somethings at his office, and used slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a man of 45. The texts kept coming, each one dripping with more arrogance and condescension than the last. "I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age. Already told my family. They agree we grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really." I screenshotted each message, adding them to my growing evidence folder. Let him dig his own hole deeper. My lawyer would adore his casual admissions of premeditation, his gleeful confessions about emptying our account. Every word, every bragging line was a gift. Then the last text arrived, bold and almost mocking. "By the way, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift." I stared at the screen for a moment, and then smiled again. Let him think he was clever. Let him believe he had the upper hand. In reality, every move he had made over the past months had been anticipated, every deception accounted for, every misstep documented. And when the papers were served, when the truth finally landed in his hands, he would see just how completely and calmly I had turned his betrayal into his undoing. "Oh, perfect." I picked up the phone and called the credit card company. "Mrs. Harrison speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Of course, ma'am," the representative replied politely. "Can you identify the charges?" "2 first-class tickets to Miami booked today," I said. "Hotel charges at the Royal Palm. And I'll also need to remove my husband as an authorized user." "Do you have documentation of the fraud?" she asked. "Text messages from my husband," I replied smoothly, admitting he used our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. "I'll be happy to forward them." There was a slight pause. Then I could hear the faintest hint of satisfaction in her professional tone as she processed everything. Within minutes, the charges were cancelled. Mark and Melissa would arrive at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalidated, their hotel reservation completely cancelled. I couldn't help a small, quiet smile at the thought. My phone buzzed again. Another text from him. "Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller." I actually laughed out loud at that one. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego grown so large that he forgot whose name was on the deed? Another buzz. "I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half." My half of the business. The boutique I had built myself, funded myself, nurtured and grown with my own 2 hands while he complained about my long hours and casually called it my hobby. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. This, I decided, qualified. Tomorrow, Mark would learn some hard truths about property law, separate assets, and just how little claim he actually had to anything I had built. But tonight, I would enjoy the quiet, sip my wine, and plan my next chapter. The future was mine, and I was ready for it. Morning arrived with a flurry of increasingly angry texts from Mark. "What the heck did you do to our credit card?" one read. "The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel cancelled our reservation." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting each message land. Let him rage, let him panic. Every word he typed, every frustrated line, only confirmed that I had been right, that my careful planning, my calm strategy, had worked perfectly. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I smiled, knowing that for the first time in years, I was completely, unshakably in control. By mid-morning, Mark's texts had turned from frantic to desperate. I could practically hear him pacing in his Miami hotel room, swearing under his breath, trying to figure out how I had managed to block his grand escape. He didn't realize that every move he'd made over the past months had been anticipated, planned, and countered. I spent the morning going through my boutique's accounts, making notes for the next expansion plan. Every sale, every client email, every small victory reminded me that my life, my work, and my future were entirely in my hands. I pored over designs for a new collection, imagining the grand reopening event where I'd invite the city's tastemakers, showcasing everything I had built myself. No husband, no betrayal, no one else's shadow over my success. Around noon my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Mark. It was my lawyer. "Claire," she said, her voice a mixture of professionalism and quiet excitement, "the papers have been served. Mark's flight was delayed, so he's in Miami, but he's received everything. You're officially free, and he can't touch a single dollar of your assets. And he's starting to realize just how separate everything really is." Smiled. A slow, satisfied smile that reached my eyes. Years of patience, careful planning, and quiet observation had led to this exact moment. He had thought he was clever. He had thought he could steal, manipulate, and humiliate me. Instead, he had handed me all the evidence I needed to protect myself, and to ensure that every single misstep he made would count against him. By afternoon, I was back in my house, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sun turn the city gold. I could hear the faint hum of life outside. Children playing, neighbors chatting, cars passing, and I felt a calm that I hadn't known for years. No one could disrupt this peace. Not him, not Melissa, not anyone. Another text from Mark arrived. This one was bitter, almost pleading. "Claire, please, we can talk. I didn't think it would go this far. You're making a mistake." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had made no mistakes. Every step had been calculated. Every precaution had been taken. And now, as he panicked, as he realized the reality of what he had done, I could plan my next chapter without fear. I opened my laptop and began writing a letter. Not for him, but for myself. A letter of reflection, of empowerment. It detailed everything I had endured, everything I had overcome, and all the ways I had refused to let betrayal define me. By the time the sun set, the wine glass was empty, but my resolve was full. Tomorrow I would open the boutique, greet my loyal customers, and continue building my empire. Tomorrow I would live without fear or doubt, knowing that I had outmaneuvered the man who had once thought he controlled me. And as for Mark and his illusions of triumph, let him stew in Miami. Let him realize too late that the life he tried to steal was never his to take. Because I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And for the first time in a very long time I felt unstoppable. I silenced my phone and headed to my boutique. Friday was always the busiest day of the week, and today was no exception. A new shipment of designer handbags had arrived, and there were boxes to unpack, displays to arrange, and customers to greet. Life went on, even when your husband ran off with a receptionist young enough to be his daughter. Around noon the phone rang. It was his mother. I took a deep breath and put her on speaker while I arranged a window display. "Claire dear," she began carefully, "Mark told us everything about how controlling you've been, how you drove him away. He says you're being vindictive now, causing problems with his travel plans." I paused, lifting a handbag onto the display rack. Did he mention emptying our joint account and charging tickets for him and his girlfriend on our credit card? There was a long silence. Then she replied hesitantly, "Well, he said you left him no choice, that you've been cold and distant." "Barbara," I said, "I have his texts. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money, or maybe the one where he mocked my age?" Another pause. "He did seem a bit cruel," she admitted. "Yes," I said calmly. "That text message was completely inappropriate. I appreciate your call, Barbara. I've always liked you, but I think it's best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Mark's family during the proceedings." "Proceedings?" she repeated quietly. "Already," I said firmly. "Goodbye, Barbara." By late afternoon, Mark's sister Amanda was spreading family gossip through mutual friends. Apparently, Mark and Melissa were stuck at a budget motel near the airport. Their Miami dreams were temporarily derailed. He had tried using his personal credit cards, but those had been maxed out for months, a red flag I had noticed long ago. My lawyer called with an update. The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday. Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets. Has he been served yet? Yes. Not yet, she replied. But he'll get the papers at his new motel address. Speaking of which, his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She's been posting about their adventure all day, including some very choice comments about you. Smiled. Perfect. Years of careful documentation, a full year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, and incriminating text messages had paid off. Mark had been so focused on his grand escape that he hadn't even considered I might be watching, waiting, preparing for this moment. My phone buzzed again. A new text from him. You think you're so smart, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine. I forwarded the message directly to my lawyer, adding it to the growing file of Mark's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling, isn't confrontation. Sometimes it's simply being prepared, being calm and quietly winning. That evening, I locked up the boutique and walked home slowly, enjoying the quiet of the empty streets. The city lights reflected off the shop windows, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of calm that had nothing to do with revenge or scheming. It was pure, uninterrupted peace. I poured myself another glass of wine, the good one I'd been saving, and sank into the couch with my laptop. I began making plans for the coming week, organizing orders, thinking about new designs, and imagining the boutique's future expansion. Every detail reminded me of how much I had accomplished on my own, without Mark, without Melissa, without anyone undermining me. This was my life, my work, my empire, and no one could take it from me. My phone buzzed. Another text. You think this ends here? I'll get what's mine. You can't hide forever. Smiled. Yes, I could. And I already had. I forwarded the text to my lawyer, keeping meticulous records of every threat, every attempt at intimidation. Each message was another nail in the coffin of his plans. Later that night, I opened my grandmother's old journal, the one I had inherited along with the house. I read her words, reminders of resilience, determination, and the quiet power of patience. I thought about how she had faced hardships of her own, and how she had always persevered. I felt her presence, her strength passing down through the generations, giving me reassurance. By bedtime, I had drafted a list of next steps. Monitor Mark's social media, coordinate with my lawyer, finalize boutique expansions, and continue documenting every detail of his increasingly desperate actions. I realized that this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about building a future so solid, so vibrant, that there would be no space for anyone else's interference. As I turned off the lights, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or anger. Mark and Melissa might be panicking, lost in a motel somewhere, but I was thriving, calm, and entirely in control of my life. The city outside whispered promises of opportunity and freedom, and I felt ready to seize every single one of them. Tomorrow, I would return to the boutique, face my customers with a smile, and continue living my life exactly as I wanted. Confident, independent, and unstoppable. And as for Mark, let him continue digging his own hole. I had no intention of helping him out. This time the victory was entirely, completely mine. Monday arrived and I was ready. The emergency hearing was everything I had prepared for, every step carefully planned, every document double-checked. Mark showed up wearing his new young wardrobe. Designer jeans that were far too tight for his age and a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Melissa waited outside, her youth painfully obvious under the harsh courthouse lighting. Inside, my lawyer presented our evidence methodically. Every piece of proof I had collected over months of careful observation was laid out clearly. Mark's gleeful text about emptying our joint account, the credit card fraud, the documented history of secret expenses, and every suspicious transaction I had tracked. Your Honor, my lawyer began, Mark's actions were deliberate, premeditated, and part of a pattern. This is not just a personal dispute. It is financial misconduct, and we have the documentation to prove it. Mark's hastily hired lawyer tried to counter. My client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been vindictive and calculating. My lawyer didn't flinch. Calculating? No, Your Honor. Prudent. My client protected her separate assets and kept detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That is not vindictive. That is smart business practice. The judge carefully reviewed the documentation, the separate property deed to the house, the corporate papers for the boutique, all in my name. The meticulous separation of business and personal finances, something Mark had always complained about, was now undeniable evidence in my favor. Mr. Harrison, the judge addressed him directly, you admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this? Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I was just trying to make a clean break, he muttered, by committing financial fraud. The judge raised an eyebrow. And now you claim rights to property that is clearly documented as separate from marital assets. Mark's lawyer jumped in again. My client is entitled to the business. My lawyer cut him off sharply. The business was established before the marriage. Mrs. Harrison maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation for every penny invested and earned. I watched Mark's face as reality began to sink in. He had thought this would be easy. Empty the accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half of my business in the divorce. He had never bothered to understand why I had insisted on keeping things separate, had mocked my careful bookkeeping as obsessive. The judge leaned forward. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct. All shared assets are frozen pending the final dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. Mark protested. But that money's gone. We spent it on. I suggest you find a way to replace it, the judge interrupted, firm and unwavering. The court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with a paramour. I sat back quietly, letting it all sink in. The evidence I had spent months gathering had done its job. Mark's plan had completely unraveled, and the court had recognized every careful step I had taken to protect myself and my assets. For the first time since that text message arrived months ago, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of triumph. I hadn't just survived. I had outsmarted him at every turn. And now, with the court on my side, the next chapter of my life, one that was completely mine, was finally beginning. After the hearing, I stepped outside the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, letting the warm air wash over me. The victory wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. Mark's dreams of escaping with Melissa, of claiming my hard-earned business, and of humiliating me, had crumbled completely. I felt lighter than I had in years, as though a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I decided to walk to the boutique, taking my time. Each step felt deliberate, grounded, and free. There were no texts to read, no frantic phone calls to answer. I was completely untethered from the chaos that had defined my life for months. By the time I arrived, the boutique was quiet. I unlocked the door and let the familiar scent of leather, perfume, and fresh linen fill my senses. My staff had been briefed on the hearing, and their smiles of relief and pride made my heart swell. We spent the afternoon reorganizing, unpacking new shipments, and discussing ideas for a special weekend promotion. The boutique wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of my independence, a place I had built with vision, sweat, and care. And now it was completely mine. Late that evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat at my desk, reflecting on everything that had happened. Months of preparation, meticulous record-keeping, and careful planning had led to this moment. I had anticipated every lie, every deceit, every desperate move Mark might make, and I had been ready. My phone buzzed once more. Another text from Mark. I didn't even open it. Let him waste his time. Let him stew in frustration. The court had made its ruling, the evidence was on record, and my life was moving forward without him. I opened a notebook and began jotting down ideas for the boutique's expansion. New lines, collaborations, marketing strategies. Each idea filled me with excitement and possibility. I realized that the months of stress, betrayal, and uncertainty had sharpened my focus and determination. I wasn't just recovering from this. I was growing stronger because of it. As the city lights twinkled outside my window, I felt a deep sense of clarity. I wasn't defined by Mark's actions or his betrayal. I was defined by my resilience, my intelligence, and my ability to take control of my own life. The next chapter would be full of opportunity, success, and freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what it meant to be unstoppable. Tomorrow would bring more work at the boutique, new customers, and fresh challenges. But tonight, I allowed myself to savor the quiet triumph, to celebrate the careful planning and courage that had brought me here. The path ahead was mine, unshakable and filled with promise. And Mark, he could watch from the sidelines. I had already won. Outside the courthouse, I could hear Melissa asking Mark about their Miami plans, but his response was completely lost in the sound of my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor. I walked back to my boutique with purpose. Each step a reminder that I was heading toward something I had built, something he had never understood or respected. The next few weeks were a strange mix of chaos and satisfaction. Mark began making increasingly desperate moves. He tried claiming the boutique had been his idea. He reminded people that he'd invested money in its early days. He even suggested he'd been my business partner all along. Every single claim was easily disproven by my meticulous records, which tracked every penny, every decision, every step of the business I had built myself. "He's getting desperate," my lawyer said one afternoon as we reviewed his latest attempts. Melissa's social media shows they're now staying at her small studio apartment. Apparently, living on a receptionist's salary isn't quite the glamorous escape he imagined. Meanwhile, Mark's family started reaching out. Their tone was completely different from the first time. Amanda, his sister, admitted, "We had no idea. He told us you'd been cold and controlling, that he needed to escape. But then we saw his texts. The way he bragged about taking your money. That's not the brother I thought I knew." His mother called again, this time in tears. "The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger. I raised him better than that," she said softly. "I thought I did. I let their calls go to voicemail. Their support might have mattered weeks ago, but now it felt like rats deserting a sinking ship. The only thing that mattered was my life, and my boutique." Ironically, the boutique thrived more than ever. Local gossip about my situation brought women through the door, many specifically to show support. They came in with sympathy and left with far more than they had planned to buy. "My ex tried something similar," one customer confided as she bought a designer handbag. "I thought he'd take everything in the divorce, but men like that never expect us to be smarter than them." My phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Mark. The tone swung wildly between anger, manipulation, and desperation. "You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support." I forwarded each message to my lawyer without replying. Let him dig his hole even deeper. Through the grapevine, I heard that Melissa was starting to have second thoughts. Apparently, sharing a tiny studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't even afford his own place wasn't exactly the romantic adventure she had imagined. The age gap that had seemed exciting in the secrecy of hotel meetings now felt completely different under the harsh light of reality. I smiled quietly to myself. Life had a way of teaching lessons. Some people learn the hard way, and some of us were just prepared to keep thriving while they floundered. And as for me, I had never felt more in control, more powerful, or more ready to enjoy the next chapter of my life. By the end of the month, life had settled into a rhythm that felt completely under my control. The boutique was thriving, bustling with customers, friends, and curious neighbors who had heard the rumors. I spent my days unpacking new shipments, arranging displays, and meeting clients who came in specifically to support me. Each sale, each compliment, each cheerful thank you reminded me that my hard work had paid off and that my success was entirely my own. Meanwhile, Mark's desperation was escalating. His texts grew more frantic and erratic, alternating between accusations and weak attempts at charm. He tried once again to claim some ownership of the boutique, saying things like, "I helped you get started," or "You wouldn't have built this without me." Each message was forwarded directly to my lawyer, adding to the growing mountain of evidence against him. I heard through mutual contacts that Melissa was struggling too. The glamorous adventure she had envisioned was fading fast. Sharing a tiny studio with a man who couldn't even manage his own finances was not what she had signed up for. The reality of Mark's recklessness and irresponsibility was sinking in, and it seemed she wasn't as thrilled about the whole escapade as she had been at the hotel. Even Mark's family had started to shift. Amanda, his sister, reached out again, this time cautiously. "We're starting to see things more clearly," she said. "The texts, the bragging, the way he took advantage. It's not the brother we thought we knew." His mother, too, had begun to understand, apologizing for her earlier disbelief and admitting that she had been misled by Mark's stories. I let the calls go to voicemail. Their support was meaningless now. I didn't need validation from anyone but myself. My focus remained on the boutique and on building a life where no one could threaten my independence. At night, I would sit at my desk with a glass of wine, reviewing plans for new collections and imagining future expansions. Each idea, each detail of strategy made me feel more empowered. I realized that Mark's betrayal hadn't set me back. It had pushed me forward. The careful documentation, the months of quiet observation, and the meticulous separation of my finances had prepared me for this very moment. Life had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't confrontation or drama. It was thriving quietly, decisively, and unapologetically. And I intended to do exactly that. While Mark floundered, Melissa panicked, and the gossip spread, I continued to build my life, one confident, unstoppable step at a time. The future was mine, and it was brighter than I had ever imagined. The reality of it hit me in small, quiet moments. Melissa had been posting online about toxic relationships and learning from mistakes. My lawyer had mentioned it yesterday during an update call, and by this morning, she had even removed her relationship status. For a moment I almost felt sorry for Mark, almost. But then I remembered his haha after telling me he'd emptied our joint account, the casual cruelty in his comments about my age, and the way he had assumed I would be helpless without him. Instead of pity, I felt something entirely different. Pride. Pride in my foresight, in my quiet strength, and in my ability to protect myself while he underestimated me. Every carefully documented record, every separation of accounts, every text I had saved now seemed like a personal victory. I had been calm while he had been careless, meticulous while he had been reckless, and observant while he had been blind to the consequences of his actions. The final divorce hearing painted a very different picture from Mark's imagined triumph. Gone was his cocky, arrogant attitude, replaced by barely concealed panic. Melissa was noticeably absent. She had moved on to a coworker her own age, according to office gossip. Mark had shown up in his old clothes. The designer wardrobe he had once flaunted apparently returned to help repay the joint account he had emptied. His lawyer looked tired, probably from trying to find loopholes in my meticulously documented separation of assets. One last time he tried to argue. "Your Honor, despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support." My lawyer cut him off sharply. Moral support. Like the text messages belittling Mrs. Harrison's business as a little shop? Or the social media posts calling it her hobby? The court has seen enough. The judge nodded, reviewing the documents I had provided. The separate property deed for my house, the corporate papers for the boutique, the careful tracking of investments and profits. Everything was in my name, entirely separate from any marital claim. When the final settlement was read, It reflected the careful planning and quiet preparation I had put into every aspect of my life. I kept my house, my business, and all of my separate assets. Mark received his personal possessions and his car, worth far less than the money he had lost by his own poor decisions. "You've destroyed me," he hissed as we left the courthouse. "I'll have to move back in with my parents." "No, Mark," I said calmly, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me too." His mother was waiting outside to drive him to her house, his new home at 45. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had mocked my age and belittled my life was now living in his childhood bedroom, while I continued running a successful business I had built from scratch. "You planned this all along," he accused bitterly. "You knew this would happen." "No," I replied evenly. "I just paid attention. And unlike you, I understood the value of keeping good records." His mother stepped between us. "That's enough, Mark. You've embarrassed yourself enough already." As they walked away, I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief. Mark had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text. Instead, he had set my carefully laid plans in motion. My phone buzzed, not with texts from Mark this time, but with notifications of new orders from my boutique's website. Life was moving forward, just not in the direction he had imagined. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique had expanded to a second location. The business that Mark had mocked as a hobby was thriving, generating more income than ever before. I hired a small team to help with operations, and together we planned new product lines, special events, and marketing campaigns. I had freedom, independence, and control of my life, and for the first time in years, the future looked bright, exciting, and entirely mine. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique had grown beyond anything I had imagined. The first location was thriving, and the new second location brought in customers from all over the city. I had hired a small, trusted team to help manage operations, and together we brainstormed new product lines, special events, and marketing campaigns. Each day was full, exciting, and entirely under my control. The gossip about Mark and Melissa had faded, replaced by admiration for the boutique and curiosity about my success. Women came in, sharing their own stories of resilience and triumph, often leaving with far more than they had planned to buy. It was as if the city itself was cheering me on, recognizing my hard work and independence. Mark, meanwhile, had completely disappeared from my life. The occasional text was long forgotten, ignored, and irrelevant. He had become a distant memory, someone whose reckless choices had only highlighted my foresight. I realized that he had been the perfect contrast to my careful planning. While he chased momentary thrills and illusions of control, I built something real, lasting, and meaningful. I spent my mornings in the boutique, greeting loyal clients and watching my team handle new shipments, displays, and online orders. Afternoons were for planning, designs, inventory, and even a long-term vision for a possible third location. Nights were mine. Quiet evenings with a glass of wine, reflecting on how far I had come, and imagining what was still possible. Sometimes I would see Mark's name pop up in mutual contacts' social media updates, posts about his struggling attempts to rebuild a life without financial security, without stability, without the independence he had once taken for granted. I didn't feel anger or resentment. I felt confirmation. Every careful choice I had made had protected me. Every hour of meticulous record-keeping, every decision to keep finances separate, every observation of his suspicious behavior had paid off. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. No one dictated my schedule, my money, or my future. I was thriving, growing, and in total control. The boutique was no longer just a business. It was a symbol of independence, resilience, and empowerment. And the best part, it was mine, completely and unequivocally mine. The future stretched ahead like a wide, open road. Expansion plans, new designs, loyal customers, and the knowledge that I could handle anything life threw at me made every day feel exciting. Life had finally moved forward, not in the direction Mark had imagined, but in the one I had carefully, quietly, and deliberately created for myself. I realized, with a smile, that the best revenge is not drama or confrontation. It's thriving quietly, confidently, and completely on your own terms. And that's exactly what I intended to do. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. While Mark struggled to rebuild a life he had recklessly destroyed, the little shop he had once mocked was thriving. I had hired 3 new employees to help manage the growing business, and the online store I launched was gaining traction nationally. Orders were coming in from other states, and the boutique's reputation as a carefully curated, stylish, and independent women's brand was spreading. News of Mark's struggles trickled back to me through mutual acquaintances. He had tried dating apps, but women his own age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents. The younger women who had once seemed intriguing had learned about his past through office gossip and steered clear. Melissa, who had once seemed enamored of him, had apparently warned her friends about his reckless behavior, sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back after she had left him. His career wasn't faring any better. The company's HR department had launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand. The promotion he had been expecting went to someone else, someone who didn't have a documented history of inappropriate relationships with reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination, but Amanda, his sister, admitted during an unexpected visit to the boutique, they're not punishing him for dating someone younger. HR just added that complaint to his file. I was surprised to see Amanda in my store, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Mark had alienated his own family. "I know we didn't support you at first," she said quietly, running her fingers over a silk scarf. He played the victim so well, but watching how he handled everything afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him. My lawyer kept me updated on Mark's continued attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied. His claims of unfair distribution were dismissed based on the overwhelming evidence of his own reckless actions. He even tried to argue that the text about emptying our joint account was just a joke. Amanda laughed when she told me. The judge asked him if a ha-ha makes theft any less illegal. Meanwhile, the boutique's success brought unexpected validation. Local business magazines wanted to feature my story, not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy businesswoman who had protected her interests. Young entrepreneurs came to me for advice about keeping business and personal finances separate. "The best protection is preparation," I told one young woman who reminded me of Melissa. "And always trust your instincts." Mark's mother called occasionally, usually after he had done something particularly self-destructive. He had tried online gambling, hoping for a quick fix to his financial problems. Then he had gotten involved with a pyramid scheme promising fast returns. Each reckless attempt to regain his former lifestyle only dug him deeper into trouble. As I watched the boutique continue to grow, I realized how stark the contrast between our lives had become. I had taken control, planned carefully, and built something lasting. Mark, on the other hand, continued to stumble from mistake to mistake, facing the consequences of his impulsive, selfish decisions. I felt no satisfaction in his failures, only relief that I had protected myself and pride in how far I had come. Life had moved forward, but it had moved in my direction, and I had no intention of looking back. By a year after the divorce, my boutique had grown into something I had never dared to dream of during those early days of uncertainty. The second location was flourishing, and the online store had become a major source of national orders. I had hired a full team to manage operations from inventory to marketing, and every day felt like a new opportunity to expand and innovate. Mark, meanwhile, had completely disappeared from my life. His attempts to date, rebuild his career, or regain any sense of control over his finances had all failed spectacularly. He had been forced to confront the reality of his poor decisions, living with his parents, watching his friends and former colleagues move forward, and realizing that the reckless choices he had made were irreversible. Melissa had moved on completely, and any trace of her connection to him faded. Friends who had once followed her lead avoided him now, aware of his erratic behavior and financial instability. His reputation was tarnished in more ways than one. His professional credibility, his personal relationships, even his image among those who had once admired him. The boutique continued to grow, and I reveled in the freedom, independence, and control I now had over my life. Every morning I walked into my stores with a sense of purpose and accomplishment, every decision and strategy a reminder that I had built this entirely on my own. Local business magazines featured me as a savvy entrepreneur, and young women often approached me for advice, seeking guidance on how to protect themselves while building a career. I shared what I had learned, the value of preparation, meticulous record-keeping, and trusting your instincts. Mark's mother occasionally called, mostly after he had made another self-destructive choice. Gambles that went wrong, get-rich-quick schemes that collapsed, or desperate attempts to recoup lost money. Each story confirmed what I already knew. Mark's actions had consequences, and I was far removed from the chaos he continued to create. I had no anger, no desire for revenge. My life was full, vibrant, and entirely mine. I was thriving professionally and personally, surrounded by supportive colleagues, loyal customers, and a growing reputation that brought opportunities one had never imagined. The contrast between our lives was staggering. I had built, nurtured, and expanded. He had stumbled, panicked, and faltered. And while he scrambled to regain control, I moved forward with confidence, independence, and peace. Looking back, I realized that the most powerful form of vindication had never been court rulings or frozen assets. It had been the life I had rebuilt and strengthened. Mark's attempts to harm me only highlighted my foresight and resilience. Each step he had taken in recklessness had made my careful planning look even smarter, and every misstep he made validated the strength and independence I had worked so hard to protect. Life had turned out exactly the way it should. I had a thriving business, financial security, and freedom. Mark's chaos and mistakes were no longer my concern. They were simply part of the background noise, a reminder of what happens when recklessness meets reality. And I was finally free to embrace the future I had always envisioned, confident, unstoppable, and entirely in my own hands. I don't know where we went wrong with him, Melissa's mother sighed during one phone call. His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet if he'd just take responsibility for his actions. But he's still blaming everyone else. His company, you, the judge. I listened politely, nodding silently in my mind, but I kept my distance. Their family drama wasn't my problem anymore. My life had moved forward, full of exciting plans for a third boutique location and even a possible expansion into luxury accessories. I was busy building, creating, and thriving, leaving the past firmly behind. The only reminder of Mark's impact on my life sat framed in my office. A screenshot of his final, cruel text before I had blocked his number. Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age. Directly beneath it rested my latest business award, a shining proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. A year after the divorce, I hosted a grand opening for my third boutique location. The event attracted local media, and the story they wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Mark's betrayal had become nothing more than a footnote in the larger story of my success. During the event, Melissa unexpectedly walked in. She looked younger than ever, or maybe it was just that I felt that much stronger. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse like a shield. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I believed everything he told me about how you were cold and controlling, how you didn't support his dreams. Then I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me when things got tough. I smiled gently, continuing to arrange a display of designer sunglasses. Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference. I know that now. She paused, looking down at her hands. He tried to move in when you froze the accounts. I thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes. I laughed quietly. Let me guess. He had big plans but no way to fund them. Exactly, she said, shaking her head. Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off, once he got that promotion, once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value. I'm dating someone my own age now. We have student loans and a small apartment, but at least we're building something real. After she left, my assistant manager leaned in and whispered, "Was that the girlfriend?" I shook my head. No. That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did. Speaking of lessons, I turned my attention to a young couple examining our designer handbags. I gestured toward them with a smile. "So, let's talk about your idea for expanding our accessories line." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, resilience, and the power of perseverance. Every bag, every display, every satisfied customer was a reminder that success comes to those who plan, protect themselves, and refuse to let anyone else define their life. And as I watched the couple excitedly discuss their ideas, I realized something profound. My story wasn't about betrayal, loss, or revenge anymore. It was about growth, strength, and the life I had built entirely on my own terms. The past was behind me, and the future, bright, limitless, and mine, stretched out ahead. Over the following months, the boutique continued to grow in ways I hadn't even anticipated. The third location quickly became a hub for loyal customers and newcomers alike, and the online store's national reach kept expanding. Orders poured in from across the country, from women who appreciated quality, style, and a business run with integrity. I had built not just a shop, but a brand that people trusted, respected, and felt inspired by. My life outside the boutique also flourished. I spent more time mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing lessons I had learned the hard way. About planning, protecting your assets, trusting your instincts, and keeping personal and business finances separate. I became a quiet role model for women who wanted independence, strength, and a life defined on their own terms. Mark faded completely from my life. Occasional updates came through mutual contacts, failed investments, more reckless financial moves, and relationships that collapsed as quickly as they began. His attempts to regain control or challenge the divorce settlement had been repeatedly denied, leaving him with no real path forward. Each failure was a reminder of the difference between preparation and impulse, foresight and recklessness. Melissa, on the other hand, had built a stable life for herself. She had learned the hard lessons about separating dreams from escapes, about choosing partners who were capable, responsible, and respectful. Seeing her growth, her confidence, her calm, and the life she was quietly building, brought me a sense of closure. It was proof that even those caught in Mark's web could find their footing and move forward. As for me, every day was a new opportunity. I introduced new product lines, held events, and expanded my team with careful, thoughtful hires. I watched my business grow with pride, knowing that every success was entirely my own. The boutique had become more than just a shop. It was a symbol of resilience, independence, and perseverance. I often reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Mark's betrayal, his cruel texts, and his reckless choices had once seemed like devastating blows. But in reality, they had set the stage for everything I had achieved. Each calculated step I had taken, opening a separate bank account, documenting every suspicious move, planning carefully for the future, had allowed me not just to survive but to thrive. The boutique was thriving, my life was full, and my confidence was unshakable. I had no desire to look back, no need for vindication beyond what I had built. Success, independence, and control over my life had become my quiet, unstoppable revenge. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that nothing, not even Mark's recklessness, could ever take that away. The best part of it all, I had turned pain into power, betrayal into opportunity, and adversity into triumph. Life had unfolded exactly as it should, and I had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever imagined. The boutique, my achievements, and the freedom I had fought for were proof that I had not just survived. I had flourished. Preparation had become second nature to me. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always emphasized the importance of protecting their assets, keeping personal and business finances separate, and trusting their instincts. I had learned those lessons the hard way, and now I wanted to help others avoid the same pitfalls. Mark's mother called one last time, not to talk about him but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she said, her voice soft but firm. "About enabling bad behavior, about making excuses for cruelty. Mark's still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems, but we're not defending him anymore. That's your legacy to our family, showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them." I thought about that legacy as I reviewed plans for a fourth boutique location. Mark had intended to diminish me, to trade me in for someone younger, and to take half of everything I'd built. Instead, he had inadvertently pushed me to become stronger, smarter, and even more successful. Every obstacle he had created, every underestimation, had fueled my determination. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Mark filed another petition to revisit the settlement. Judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. "Thought you'd enjoy that." I smiled, imagining him stuck in his childhood bedroom, still trying to rewrite an ending that had been determined the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. 2 years after Mark's cruel text, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal. It was about building and protecting a successful business. My story had evolved from a cautionary tale into inspiration. During the Q&A session, a woman asked about keeping business and personal finances separate. "My husband says I'm being paranoid, that marriage means sharing everything," she said. I nodded knowingly. "My ex-husband said the same thing, right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce." Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia. It's smart planning. By now, the boutique chain had grown to 5 locations, each more successful than the last. The little shop Mark had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in several national magazines. Through mutual friends, I heard that Mark had finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above a garage. He had been forced to take a lower-paying job after his former company downsized, and his dating profile still claimed he was young at heart, though his photo was clearly outdated. Melissa, ironically, had become a regular customer at my original boutique location. She had earned her business degree and started her own social media consulting company. "You inspired me," she told me once, showing how a woman can build something lasting instead of falling for empty promises. I kept Mark's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I had come. Below it hung a sign that read, "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique, I stood before my employees and loyal customers. The space had been transformed from a single little shop into the flagship store of a thriving business empire. Mark's mother attended, though I hadn't sent her an invitation. She waited until the crowd thinned to approach me. "I saw Mark yesterday," she said, smoothing her designer dress, one she had bought from my store. "He was talking about his glory days, about the life he could have had. He still doesn't understand that he didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it away." I thought about that text message, the casual cruelty, his assumption that I would crumble without him, how he expected me to beg and break to prove him right about my desperation. Instead, I had built something stronger than before. Each new boutique location was a testament to what women could achieve when they stopped dimming their light for insecure men. The young saleswoman I'd hired last month approached me shyly, holding a stack of design sketches for a new accessories line. "I've been inspired by everything you've done," she said. "I want to help expand the boutique even further." I smiled, realizing that my story was no longer about betrayal or loss. It was about empowerment, resilience, and growth. Every decision, every risk, and every moment of preparation had brought me here. And the future, bright and full of possibilities, was entirely mine to create. In the months after the 5th boutique anniversary, I began exploring ideas for a 6th location and a new line of luxury accessories. My mornings were filled with strategy meetings, design reviews, and mentoring sessions with my team, while afternoons were spent visiting suppliers and checking in on each boutique location. Every decision reinforced the independence and resilience I had fought to build. The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of empowerment. Young women came not only to shop but to learn, to see what determination and careful planning could achieve. I often held informal workshops in the flagship store, guiding aspiring entrepreneurs on everything from branding to financial management. My story had grown into a lesson about foresight, diligence, and refusing to let anyone else dictate the course of your life. Through mutual friends, I occasionally heard updates about Mark. He had managed to move into a slightly larger apartment but still struggled financially. His jobs were low-paying, his investments had mostly failed, and his attempts to restart a dating life were awkward and short-lived. He seemed perpetually frustrated and confused, unable to grasp that the mistakes he had made were entirely of his own making. Melissa continued to thrive. Her social media consulting business was growing steadily, and she often visited the boutiques for both inspiration and professional insight. Occasionally, she would stop by my office just to chat, sharing stories about her successes and challenges. She no longer carried the weight of Mark's manipulation. Instead, she had learned to trust herself and her instincts, building a life grounded in reality rather than illusions. My phone buzzed occasionally with business inquiries, collaboration requests, and invitations to speak at conferences. I had become a recognized voice in my industry, celebrated not just for the boutiques but for the careful, smart, and ethical way I ran them. The framed text from Mark in my office remained there, now more of a symbol of triumph than of cruelty, a reminder that adversity, when faced with preparation and strategy, could become the greatest teacher. Even Mark's family seemed to have adjusted. His mother sometimes called, not to complain or intervene, but to share small victories in her own life and occasionally to update me on his continued struggles. I listened politely, offering encouragement where I could, but I no longer felt responsible for his choices. The lessons had been learned, the boundaries firmly set, and my focus remained on building, expanding, and empowering. As the boutique expanded into a new line of luxury accessories, I realized something profound. The life I had created was entirely mine. No betrayal, no cruel words, no past mistakes could diminish the empire I had built. Every store, every employee, every satisfied customer was proof that careful planning, preparation, and determination could turn even the most difficult circumstances into opportunity. Looking around the flagship store one evening, watching employees help customers, laughing with young entrepreneurs, and reviewing plans for the sixth boutique, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey that had begun with a single cruel text had led to a thriving business, personal growth, and empowerment. Not just for me but for others who had been inspired by the story of how I rebuilt my life. The boutique had become more than a business. It was a testament to resilience, strategy, and the quiet power of staying true to oneself. And as I closed the store for the evening, I knew that no challenge, no betrayal, and no obstacle could ever take away what I had earned. Life had unfolded in the way it should, full of growth, independence, and the promise of endless possibilities. Coincidentally, another Melissa, one of my young employees, came over that morning with a question about the new inventory system I had recently implemented. She looked a little unsure, holding a clipboard and a tablet, and I could see the determination in her eyes. I smiled and patiently explained the process, walking her through each step, showing her how the system would make tracking shipments, stock levels, and orders far easier and more efficient. As I spoke, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the store window. For a brief moment I paused and really looked at myself. I saw what Mark had failed to see 5 years ago. Not a woman fading with age or struggling under betrayal, but a woman growing wiser, stronger, and more successful with every challenge she had faced. Every difficult choice, every calculated decision, every act of preparation and resilience was written on my face, in the way I held myself, in the confidence in my eyes. Mark's cruel text message, meant to be the devastating end to our story, had instead become the catalyst for an entirely new chapter of my life. It had pushed me to be meticulous, to protect myself, to build something that no one could take from me. That single moment of betrayal had transformed into years of growth, empowerment, and achievement. And it wasn't just about me. That text, and the way I had responded to it, became a symbol for every woman who had felt underestimated, belittled, or dismissed. It showed that a person's worst intentions can sometimes ignite their own downfall while inspiring others to rise. Every time a customer, a young entrepreneur, or a colleague saw what I had built, they were reminded that they, too, deserved more. More respect, more independence, more opportunity. The boutique had grown into a thriving business empire, and every corner of it, from the original flagship store to the newest location, from the online shop to the luxury accessories line, stood as a testament to perseverance, intelligence, and courage. My story was no longer about betrayal. It was about triumph, growth, and the quiet, unstoppable power of resilience. I looked back at Melissa, who was now confidently navigating the new system on her own, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was the real legacy of those 5 years, not revenge or spite, but the creation of something lasting, something meaningful, something that could inspire and empower others. The reflection in the window reminded me that the ending Mark had tried to write for me never existed. Instead, I had written my own story, one of independence, achievement, and undeniable strength. And as I returned my attention to guiding Melissa through the system, I smiled, knowing that the life I had built, the lessons I had learned, and the impact I had made were all mine, and no one could ever take that away. Mark had tried to define my story, but I had rewritten it for myself. And in doing so, I had shown not just myself, but every woman who heard it, that she deserved better than someone else's midlife crisis, better than cruelty disguised as humor, and better than a life dictated by someone else's weakness. As the months went by, the boutique continued to evolve in ways I had only dreamed of. I began experimenting with limited edition collections, collaborating with local designers, and hosting exclusive events that drew attention from fashion magazines and influencers alike. Each new initiative reinforced the lessons I had learned through hardship. Preparation, foresight, and protecting what was mine were more than business strategies. They were life strategies. The team I had built grew with me. Young women like Melissa, eager to learn and ambitious in their own right, thrived under guidance that combined practical knowledge with encouragement. Watching them gain confidence, take risks, and see the results of their work reminded me of my own journey from being underestimated to becoming unshakable. Every success of theirs felt like a ripple effect of my own resilience. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard updates about Mark. His life had become a series of small setbacks, a string of low-paying jobs, failed investments, and a dating life that rarely lasted past a few awkward weeks. He seemed to have no plan, no preparation, no sense of consequence. Everything he had once dismissed as trivial or inconvenient had become the foundation of his continued struggles. Melissa, now confidently running her consulting business, would stop by occasionally to consult on online marketing strategies for the boutiques. She had grown into a capable, independent woman who had learned the hard lessons of manipulation and empty promises. Seeing her success reinforced that the mistakes of the past were not permanent chains. They could be transformed into stepping stones for growth. The boutique itself had become more than a business. It was a symbol of empowerment, independence, and careful planning. Local media began featuring the story of my growth, not as a tale of betrayal, but as an example of what women could achieve when they refused to be defined by others. Each new boutique location, each new line of accessories, and each satisfied customer reflected the values I had built my life on: resilience, intelligence, and the courage to protect one's own path. Occasionally, Mark's family would reach out, though their calls were less about him now and more about sharing small personal milestones or checking in. I listened politely but never involved myself in his drama again. My focus remained on building, expanding, and mentoring those who genuinely sought growth and inspiration. One evening, as I locked up the flagship store, I reflected on the journey. A single text message, meant to hurt and undermine me, had instead sparked years of growth, empowerment, and success. Every decision I had made, from opening separate bank accounts to documenting suspicious behavior, had created a foundation that no betrayal could shake. I had turned adversity into opportunity, cruelty into motivation, and a moment of pain into a lifetime of achievement. Looking out at the city skyline from the boutique's front window, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The boutique was thriving, my team was growing, and the next chapter of expansion, both in stores and influence, was already in motion. Life had unfolded in a way that Mark could never have anticipated, and the woman he had underestimated was now not only surviving but thriving, inspiring others to do the same. The reflection in the glass reminded me of the woman I had become, wise, confident, and unstoppable. That cruel text had not been the ending. It had been the beginning of everything I had built, everything I had earned, and everything I had become. And in that quiet moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest victories are not loud, dramatic, or public. They are the life you quietly build while the world underestimates you.